Namaste, everyone. So here I am, joining you again from my rooftop with Arunachala in the background. It's a beautiful day here. And I wanted to follow on a little from my first video and say a little bit more about the awakening process as I was speaking about it. So if you remember, I was emphasizing that the recognition of the presence of freedom here and now, which is the foundation of the direct path, is not enough, right? So that's what we assert and endeavor to surrender to in the context of this project and in the context of any authentic spiritual teaching, is that the goal, if you like, is always already the case. In other words, our true nature is always already full and complete. It's already available. Right? And of course, this undercuts the whole tendency and the momentum of seeking for some particular state or feeling or quality that's not actually already here. So that's the basis. And I was making the point that of course you've all had to some degree some direct recognition of that truth, otherwise you wouldn't be involved with the Awaken Life project. or if you're somebody who wouldn't be involved with this project, if you're actually on the path for real, in terms of a real awakening process that's not based on seeking, it can only be because you've recognized that in your heart, let's say. So that's the foundation. But as I said, simply reminding yourself of that, having yourself or others point out, look, but you're not this, you're not that, that's not really who you are, that's just a self-image. That's obviously a big part of what being devoted to this endeavor really means, but it's not enough, because the transformation that we're all longing for is only going to occur when we actually free our energy, right, which means our feeling being, and we free our attention, our consciousness and our mind, from all of the patterning that we are attached to, all of the patterning that causes us to fundamentally still believe, usually in a way that's very unexamined, that we are still this separate self that's in here somewhere. So that's why I was emphasizing that there needs to be meditation and inquiry, but there also needs to be the willingness to take on certain disciplines and practices, and also to open our heart in a very big devotional gesture, so that our whole being is made available to this awakening process. And so I want to speak a little bit about one way to understand this process, which I think might be helpful to you all, which is to break it up into maybe 3 stages. Right? But all the while, it's important to remember that the ultimate ground of liberation here and now is always already available, right? So it's not a progressive path of like, I have to go through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then I will get there. It's no, the there that you want to get and you want to inhabit is always already here. It's always already the case. But we could say that there's a process that goes through stages in terms of becoming more, recognizing that, understanding that, and becoming more and more grounded in that depth and recognition. So the first stage is really what we could call the listening phase. This is one way that Adidar refers to it, which I think is very helpful. So the listening phase is when you first would come across a teaching like this, and also get in touch with this deeper possibility for awakening. And the listening means that you start to observe. You start to observe yourself. And what that means, so self-observation means you start to take the position of the witness. You start to observe your patterning. Right? Oh, okay, there's these thoughts, there's these emotions, there's these memories. You start to, what before was just subject to you. In other words, no, this is just me, right? You could say, me, starts to become object to you. So you start to detach and get some distance from the automatic identification with mind and emotion, with your psychological experience. And in the beginning process, and this is why meditation, of course, is fundamental, because that's when you take some time out every day just to be and just to observe in that sense. And then also in your life, if you're really serious, you start becoming curious and interested in your own patterning. And usually, it takes some time to actually get familiar with this patterning. First of all, let's say the ego's like a fist, like the self-contraction. You start to see one finger. Oh, look at that. Oh, oh, right, yeah, and I do that. And oh, look, when that happens, or I'm triggered in that way, you start to see, you could say, aspects. You start to see aspects of your self-contraction, of your ego disposition, and that's why this process takes time, and that's why, in general, I would say it takes a few years, not always, but it usually takes a few years of being seriously engaged with this process. To get to a point where you fundamentally not only have observed, but you fundamentally understand what your game is, what how your ego is patterned, what your tendencies are. And, you can see that and maybe see that over and over again. But, it takes some time to really recognize, okay, this is something that I'm doing. This is my activity. This is not just something that's happening to me. And then only then can we begin to take responsibility for it and for ourselves, for our own awakening. So that's what we could call the listening process, which obviously deepens over time. And as I said, at any moment in this process, you might have, in meditation, or one day in a group, or just spontaneously walking down the street one day, you might see through the whole thing, and you might recognize, wow, none of that was ever me. I am not my mind. I'm not this separate self that I presume myself to be. So the radical immediacy is always available, but usually, we might have a revelation, awakening like that, especially on a retreat or in a meeting. And then we fall back. We kind of fall back into this more or less personal relationship to life, and a certain familiarity with ourselves and how we respond to life. So, the listening process is all about observing that way, that we fall back and getting interested in what is the content of consciousness that we get fascinated by, and then our energy and our attention gets captivated by certain desires, by certain fears, right? By certain tendencies, certain just ways of being. So if we really commit ourselves to the process, we start to unravel this contraction. And a very key aspect of this process, especially in the listening stages, is to be willing to take on discipline, right? So we did, this time last year, we were developing what we called the Awaken Life disciplines. And, you find some kind of discipline that's very much related to this in any authentic spiritual tradition, because it just has to do with becoming aware of where you tend to indulge yourself, right? So in ways that are selfish, are egoic, and ultimately lead to your own frustration and suffering. And also ways in which you tend to resist or deny or avoid whatever aspects of yourself, certain life situations, whatever. So